Welcome to episode 189 of Stageworthy. I'm your host, Phil Rickaby. Stageworthy is a podcast about people in Canadian theatre featuring conversations with actors, directors, playwrights, and more. We're now about a week away from the start of the Toronto Fringe, and I want to remind you that Simple Truth Theatre presents my solo play, The Commandment, at the Toronto Fringe. The Commandment is a dark comedy about what happens when an atheist discovers that he's been chosen to deliver God's new commandment, and it will be presented at the Tarragon Extra Space. You can find out all about it by finding it in your Fringe listings or by following me on my social links on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Rickaby, and you can also find details on simpletruththeatre.com. And as always, if you want to drop me a line about the podcast, you can find it on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StageworthyPod, and the website is stageworthypodcast.com. Now let's talk about Today Takes. Today Takes is an app and website that offers easy and affordable access to a wide variety of must-see cultural performances, from plays and musicals to dance, opera, comedy, immersive experiences, and beyond. Looking at the app right now, I can see that there's a lot of tickets there. Oh, there's rush tickets for Othello at Stratford, as well as Little Shop of Horrors. It is a great spot to grab some really affordable tickets to shows, and I highly recommend it. Today Takes makes ticket buying simple, and you can purchase tickets in less than 30 seconds. Get it on iOS and Android, or go to todaytakes.com. And remember to use the code STAGEWORTHY when you make your first purchase on the app. So this is my 5th Toronto Fringe episode of the season. So remember that from now until the end of Fringe, I'll be talking to performers and creators with shows at the Toronto Fringe. And don't forget my regular Fringe roundup on both of the Saturdays of the Toronto Fringe, where I will sit down with a group of artists and talk about their Fringe to date, what shows they've loved, and more. Those episodes are recorded and released by noon on the Saturdays of the Fringe. My guest this week is Mark Brownwell. Mark is a Toronto-based playwright and is the adapter of Pea Green Theatre's Three Men on a Bike, premiering at the Toronto Fringe this July. So why don't we talk about Three Men on a Bike?
Sure.
Which is, because I misread the press release the first time I saw the announcement. I read Three Men in a Boat, which is, and this is like sort of a sequel to that. Yeah. So for people who might not know what Three Men in a Bike is, how would you describe that?
Well, it's sort of a follow-up sequel to an adaptation of a book by a guy named Jerome K. Jerome, who was a Victorian author, circa like 1889. Mm-hmm. The original book that he published, it was in serial form originally, and it was supposed to be a very serious travelogue up the River Thames.
Okay.
And everybody took it as comedy instead. So it turned out he had a gift for that. Jerome was a really interesting writer. He was sort of jack of all trades. He wasn't really successful at anything else that he did, and that was his big joke. Was the only reason I'm a writer is because I've been a failure at everything else. That turned out to be a really massive hit for him, and it's still in print. There's been several different theatrical versions. We did our version of it in 2014. I wrote the adaptation in maybe 1994 or something.
Well, Three Men in a Boat traveled like all over. Like you guys,
it's still traveling. It's touring to Halifax in June. They're doing Kingston. We're probably heading back to Mumbai.
Yeah. Wow.
Because it was one of those sort of fluky things. One of the guys who runs this literary festival in Mumbai called the Tata Lit Live. He saw it just on a whim at the Fringe in 2014, and we got the email, hey, do you want to go to Mumbai? And I was like, yeah.
Well, I think that's most people's response to something like that would be like, yeah, sure.
And all along the way, you're kind of going, this is never going to... And sure enough, sure enough, we did, and that was sort of the trip of a lifetime. So it's kind of been all over. This will be the new play. It's sort of maiden voyage at the Fringe, which is where we started the original. The original, we're doing like a fundraiser in June, and they'll be doing it again, and that'll be the 15th production of it.
Did it travel like to basically every Fringe in Canada, or because I saw it certainly hit some of the major ones?
Yeah, we did Winnipeg, we did Edmonton. We never got to Vancouver. But we did Toronto. We did Ottawa. They did really well in Ottawa. They got a Critics' Circle Choice Award. And then we did Best of the Fringe in a couple of those places. We did The Next Stage the year after it. And they got a Dora nomination for that, the three men.
Nice.
And so we started touring it about into sort of larger venues than the Fringe. Basically a show. It's designed to tour.
Yeah.
The set is a stool and a dog, a stuffed dog, and that's it. So, once you do that and you get a successful run going, people start asking, well, what else have you got?
Sure.
So that's why we decided to sort of look into the further writings of him. And Jerome had a couple of interesting books that came afterwards. Not as famous as the first one, but for example, he was a failed actor. His sister had been a very successful actor on the Victorian stage. And it was a really good time to be an actor because you could actually make a living. He couldn't. He was that bad. And so he wrote a little sort of satirical piece called My Life on Stage and Off. So it's not just about three men on a bicycle taking a bike tour of Europe. It's also about his sort of feeling around as a failed actor. So we're kind of throwing in little sort of theatrical flares and touches into it.
Have you combined two books into one for that, or is it
number of books? He also I guess his other most famous one was a series called The Idler, Idle Thoughts of an Idle Fellow, and he just he's a very funny writer. He's very, you could call him sort of proto Woodhouse. Some people compare him to like early Python, that very sort of weird, dry, British humor that comes at you from an odd angle.
And he's writing around when?
End of the 19th century.
In the 19th century, yeah.
Three Men on a Bike is set in 1900.
Okay.
Because their previous trip was such a disaster, it takes them like years and years and years in order to get up the balls to go on tour, to do it again. And this time they decided to stay on dry land, and they decide to do a bicycle tour of Germany up into the Black Forest. And
did that go any better than the boat trip?
No. In fact, it was a little more dangerous because they're just in the boat. They're just in a canal, right?
Right.
This is like they are basically trying to get up the German Alps, and the brake in the bicycle at the time hadn't quite been developed properly.
Oh my
yet.
Goodness!
It was a very new kind of thing. So it's a lot more dangerous, shall we say? Okay, yeah. And it's kind of a clash of cultures as well. Jerome had a lot to say about Europe and traveling in Europe, and we keep it very, very light, but there's some interesting sort of observations about it.
And you were saying like Three Men in a Boat was basically like a stool and a stuffed dog. What does Three Men on a Bike look like? Well,
we promise no bicycles.
Okay, well, yeah.
It may actually have no set whatsoever.
Okay. That's certainly tourable.
It is absolutely tourable, yeah. And it's kind of designed that way, too. Yeah. We use a style called spoken decor. Okay. It's something that we've done, my partner and I, Sue Miner, have done for a long, long time. It's basically a storytelling style, very theatrical, almost very like Victorian music hall style, which fits the period really well. So it's the old Shakespeare quote, think when we talk of horses that you see them. Spoken decor is essentially you paint the scene with your words and with the physical action. Okay. It's a very physical form of theater, even though it's a narrative. And we've had some great success with it in different kind of genres. We've been doing a lot of historical genres lately, and we just really like sitting in the past, and it allows us a little more freedom in terms of what we present.
Does working with the past and history allow you a little more freedom to comment on the now because it's in the past?
Yeah, it's the old Brechtian trick of distancing, which they called Verfremdung. You make it about something else, something completely alien, and yet you comment on society now.
Right.
I used to think it was a political... Brecht used it as a political tool, but it's actually very useful as a theatrical convention as well. It's very, it's light comedy. There's no... We're not trying to say anything deeply profound. In fact, one of the characters said this play wouldn't elevate a cow. It's just straight up light British comedy. I think people do like to see white collar, upper middle class men misbehaving and getting their comeuppance. Yeah. The first one's like that, and the second one's very much like that too. It's that sort of confident British disaster. It works really well with the crowds, and as it turns out, it's kind of a universal because the books are very well known, just not just here, but also obviously in England, but also around the world. Like, we couldn't believe how many people knew the book in Mumbai when we toured the original show there.
Really?
They knew everything. They knew the characters. They used Three Men in a Boat for training in English. Like, they use it as an example of English and British writing.
Do you think they knew it better than audiences here do?
Absolutely.
What was it like? Is there a difference in performing a show where people know the source material better than the people at home? Like, when you perform it at home and people don't know it, are people reacting very differently?
Well, people do know it here, but not with the intensity. We haven't done it in England yet, and it's a bit like Coles to Newcastle, you know, like these damn Canadians coming over doing our classic, right? But in Mumbai, there were a number of cultural differences that were very interesting. The audience is far more active.
Oh, okay.
They have a different sense of space and barrier in terms of like no fourth wall. So at the end of a show, it's for ours anyway, it was typical for the audience to rush backstage to thank the actors.
Oh, really? Okay.
And we had a...
Did anybody warn you about that?
No.
No. Okay.
We had a wonderful... that. In fact, they were half undressed in the dressing room when a crowd of folks just came busting in to thank them. And they were completely caught off guard.
Yeah.
The stage manager was there trying to hold the door going, they're Canadians, don't, you know.
Yeah.
And it was quite interesting. The culture shock there was crazy. Mumbai was amazing. Like, it was sort of the trip of a lifetime.
Yeah.
It's a really humongous city, and the culture shock, juxtaposition of intense poverty with intense wealth. Side by side on the street. It was quite a shock.
That must be a shock. Be a shock. Considering when this play was written, or sorry, when the original source material was written, in a way, that almost sort of feels contemporaneous with the era where there was very severe poverty and there was very severe, extreme wealth at the same time.
Yes. It's very light comedy. There's not a lot of social mention. It's not Dickens. You know, it's something that's a little more just very light satirical.
Sure.
Also, too, you can compare. You know, in Mumbai, there is that. Here, though, there's a difference, and it's good that it has a cultural. It still has a cultural resonance. For me, it has more to do with the fact that Canadians have all kinds of really terrible camping stories, and that's what the show is about. And that's what the new show is about as well. You know, getting out in nature and all that, and just the disaster that ensues. We're not prepared for it, but that's the closest sort of connection we can take.
What is it that's been drawing you? I mean, aside from, because when did you start being interested in basing your more recent works in the past? Because I don't think that's something that's not a long-standing thing. Yeah.
Well, it comes with age and a couple of things. When my wife and I first started to do our shows, we were working. You know, we graduated from the school and we toured around, but we never toured around together. We were like 2 years out of school, and she would be in New Brunswick. I'd be in somewhere else, like Regina or something. And it's not a great way to keep a relationship together.
No.
So we kind of made a conscious decision to, if we wanted to stay together, to start doing our own stuff.
Yeah.
So it was really a personal decision as opposed to, we will make the great theater, you know. And we first started with all, I see with students now, you start with very earnest theater, social justice theater.
Yeah.
I think our first one was about Vietnam veterans from Canada, and it was all a bunch of monologues. So it was very much documentary drama, serious stuff, right? We did a number of these. They were actually pretty successful. And then you kind of get sick of that kind of style. And we started sort of drifting into sports and the idea of sports and theater and how they're sort of intermingled. So, for example, one of our first very successful shows was about the Gretzky trade way back in like '88, and that ended up being a really good show for us. Like it toured all around, and it sort of struck a note, and we realized, wow, sports, there seems to be some kind of connection, right? And then we did a show called Play Balls, which is about a female umpire trying to break into the major leagues. And that was based on a true story, and that one was really something. So we weren't always doing historical theater. Then I was listening to a guy named Gary Cates, who'd written a biography on the Chevalier d'Eon, who was the famous trans person in Baroque France, like the grandmother of all trans people. And we got in contact with him, and we wrote this one piece that's still touring. Like it had a last show in Chicago this summer, and then of course the students at George Brown just did it as well. So that's kind of our first dip into the historical.
Right.
After that, it was very like we're very eclectic, and I think most people are these days in terms of their production. There's no one specific movement that we like. I was trained with Brecht. When I was at the school with my partner, we didn't do Shakespeare. The head of the school is a Marxist, so we did Brecht. Some good, some bad. So consequently, there was always that kind of social element to it, and sort of a left-wing bent to it. So we did a show about a Swiss clown revolt during the Middle Ages. We did a number of different shows. We did a show about an artist by the name of Joseph Cornell, who was a sort of a surrealist in New York. We did a show about Martha Stewart at Buddy's that was really popular, and then a bunch of your fellow classmates were in it too. So we've kind of been all over the map.
Yeah.
It just, we're always looking to generate new material. I'm working right now on a piece on the Dadaists, but the female Dadaists, the ones who are forgotten, like Hannah Hoch and Annie Hennings, who performed at the Cabaret Voltaire. Trying to find a space for that. Yeah. And it's the exact opposite of Three Men on a Bike. It's much further out there. It's more like performance art kind of style. So we really are very eclectic. This one has been our most sort of successful venture so far, just in terms of it's very odd for us to write a sequel. Yeah. Because normally you do a show, it does okay or it doesn't do okay. Sure. You move on to something else. This one, the demand is there, so like we're essentially going to be continuing it, and hopefully it will be as good as the other one. I think it is. We're approaching it from a very distinctive sort of point. It's really great to revisit those characters and to sort of adapt stuff that's new for them. Yeah. So that was really fun for me, revisiting, because the characters are wonderful. It's a character-driven piece. Yeah. And they're very, each one is unique and very British and very uptight. So. Is it,
in terms of, have you started rehearsals for it yet? Are you?
Yeah, we've had a couple of workshops. Yeah. We don't go into it. We open in the Fringe in July. We're at the Tarragon Mainspace, and we'll have one workshop in May, and then another, I think, 3 weeks before we open it up. But we've been sort of kicking it around for about a year and a half now, anyway. So that's the way we develop work.
Yeah. It's good to have. You have sort of a track record, which is good to go into Fringe with. Can we talk for a bit? I'm very curious. One of the things I always talk about on the podcast is people's theatrical origin story. Like what made you want to do this, and what was your path from there to here?
You mean just to go into theater in general?
Yeah, sure. What was your first like?
Well, I know this because I also teach at George Brown. I teach theater history at George Brown. And I've noticed, because we've done our share of theater for young audiences as well. I have a show touring right now with a small opera company called Shoestring. And you see all these little kids coming in for the first time seeing a show. And that was essentially me. I was watching like Aladdin at Bayview Glen, nursery school. Yeah. And when Aladdin walked up, I just went, I want to be that. I want to be that person. So for me, it was very early. I always poll my students every year. I say, how many people were that kid? And most of them go, they don't have a choice. It's like you're just called. It's a call.
But there's a difference, because some people they'll do some theater. The parents put them in theater when they were kids, or they do it in high school, and then there comes a point where they say, "Well, that's it. I can go on and do something sensible." And there's a small subset of people who stick with it. What was it that made you decide to be one of those people that stuck with it?
Oh, it never stops being fun. Yeah. I perform way less than I used to. And I just I've been really having a lot of fun creating these things. I didn't consider myself a playwright until like my fourth or fifth play.
Right.
Because we were just generating content
Sure.
to be able to work together, you know? So you develop a stable of people, community that we work with constantly. Ron, one of your classmates is Ron Kell's one of those. And it's always fun. I always think it's never going to happen. As you know, you kind of go, I don't know how in the hell this is going to work, but it's never gotten to be a job for me. So that's why I'm still at it.
Yeah.
Also, too, I think it sounds odd, but we've remained small on purpose. Like we really, we don't have a space. We've never had operating funding. We rely a little bit on project grants, but we can't really expect that to keep happening the way things are going.
Yeah.
And we're at an age now where, we can do our own stuff.
Yeah.
And just, as long as we can do our own stuff, opening it, some giant monster thing would be nice, but it's kind of nice just having control over it.
Yeah.
And we've done larger projects as well. We wouldn't have had any success had we not done it ourselves. And that, when we first started out, like in '88 or something like that, all of the common knowledge was you don't do it yourself. You're an actor. You can't be a writer if you're an actor. You can't be a director if you're an actor, right? You had your own little slot. And if you said, "Oh, I want to be a playwright," in an audition, they would look at you like you had 9 heads.
Yeah.
Right? Now that's completely changed.
Well, because when I was at George Brown, that was like the prevailing knowledge was we are training you to be an actor. If don't, and people would say, like, if you can do something, like if you can stage manage, don't mention it. If you can playwright, don't don't mention it. And occasionally somebody would say, well, if you fail as an actor, you can always create your own work. You could do the Fringe Festival or something like that.
Yeah.
And that seemed to be the prevailing attitude at the time.
There was a huge snobbery around the Fringe. That's no longer the case.
No.
Because the larger theaters have recognized that the Fringe is an incubator for new ideas. In fact, the creative content that is going on in Canadian theaters from the Fringe, there's no healthier section than the Fringe.
No, absolutely.
The money's not great. People can make money on the Fringe tour, but you have to really narrow down the sort of scope of your art. You can't have 12-person shows.
No, you can really only do like 2 people or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's sort of fascinating to me how I think it's taken a long time for the acting education complex, for want of a better phrase, to accept the fact that what those of us who have been in the industry for a while is that creating your own work is essential to a career in the theater. For most people. Yeah,
and that didn't necessarily do it DIY stuff was not the case. Now you have to.
Yeah.
We tell that to our graduating students. DIY, you have to create your own stuff. It's the only way to get noticed.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's how we got to work on larger projects. Because I have a very major, a couple of major writing projects going on that has nothing to do with our company right now. And I wouldn't have had those opportunities had we not self-produced. I had an agent. It was in 1988. We were doing a little tiny show in the Rivoli. It was Bob Naismith from Theatre Passmore. He was wonderful, right? Just a little, bar-side show and stuff. It was a great show. And this old agent by the name of Frank Hogg came up to me and said, "Who produced this?" And I said, "We did. We did it ourselves." "Y'all, you're fools. Never spend your own money." And it's well, you know what, Frank?
Yeah.
Guess what? We did, and we got noticed because of it. We got work out of that show.
Yeah.
So that's the way to do it these days. That's in a weird way, it's always been the way to do it. And you get to maintain creative control. The only drag is that theater, unlike the 19th century, it's a lot harder to make a real living at it.
Sure. It's also hard to find, there's a dearth of affordable spaces in this city. And that sort of also presents a bit of a barrier, which is why Fringe is such an essential part of doing anything, because it doesn't cost you thousands of dollars to enter.
Well, God bless the Fringe. God bless the smaller festivals.
Yeah.
It's astonishing to me every year looking at the list of the companies that didn't get into the Fringe. Hundreds and hundreds of them on the list.
Yes.
There's a desire and there's a hunger for theater and to produce art, and it's not being served. It's just not being served. I don't think the arts councils expected that kind of an explosion.
No.
In terms of how many people were interested in it. Now, whether that wafts and wanes, who knows?
Yeah.
But the fact is, it is the theatrical, the artistic engine that's driving Canadian theater.
Yeah.
It ain't Stratford.
No.
You know?
I mean, you just look at the shows that have become staples of Canadian theater. You can look at Kim's Convenience, for example, which has toured the world, The Kick in My Hair, even The Drowsy Chaperone. I remember the year after that hit Broadway, everybody was doing musicals at the Fringe.
It flipped really fast. Yeah.
But you know, these are this is where the work is happening, where people are creating interesting stuff.
Yeah, and that's really great. I mean, Toronto and the problems that we're facing now in terms of the condoization of it and all these the storefront movement. I think it has to move on somewhere else. Essentially, we know loads of artists who moved to Hamilton.
Yeah,
even Hamilton's starting to get crazy. But that's the way it works, right?
Yeah.
The artists are the first ones to move into the grottier neighborhoods, taking up the storefronts, taking up the little hipster kind of joints, and that's when it happens.
Yeah.
And then the artists get the boot. And, And that's what's going on in Toronto right now.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, because I think we've been a bit ghettoized in terms of our art. Something bluer.
Yeah.
You could just in terms of like places like Witchwood, the Witchwood Barns. It's a beautiful space, but it's considered distant, and it shouldn't be.
No, it shouldn't.
It's really downtown,
It is downtown. It doesn't take that. It's not that hard to get to,
Yeah.
It's also, you look at spaces like the coal mine, which is, again, it has that, when you're downtown, it has that barrier, because some people, they have this, I can't go past Pape or whatever their border is, but they serve a neighborhood, and they do quite well out there. And I think that it's something that if we were to spread out more, that could be.
That's something that I don't think the master planners are figuring out. I think a lot of what would you call them? Politicians, administrators. They think that theater isn't vital as a community glue.
No,
and it is, but even places like the Canada Council now, the way that Simon Brault has taken the idea of theater. I've named Simon Brault, but there's this attitude amongst higher echelon administrators that you should, let's do virtual theater. Let's have theater with robots.
Yeah.
Let's do Hamlet with, Ophelia in St. John's and Hamlet over in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Let's have these little webisodes, and to me, honestly, that's not theater. It can be something great. 1 million people could watch it. That's fantastic. Go for it. Don't call it theater, because there's no methexis. There's no sharing with
theater. Has to happen. The audience has to be in the same room. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just watching Netflix.
Yeah. And that's primary. And, can't knock Netflix.
No,
it's all entertainment. It's all wonderful. There's some very serious, some wonderful stuff. But the fact is, theater provides something that none of those other things can provide.
There's a very different thing that happens in a room full of people watching a movie than in a room of people watching theater.
Yeah.
It feels different. It feels different,
And it's not just like the fourth wall, or what would you call it, the suspension of disbelief, because I find, movies are so immersive.
Sure.
You can suspend your disbelief quite easily, but there's some weird live sharing that comes with theater that's beyond that. It's methexis.
Absolutely. And you can do something so simple in a theater that people would never accept in a movie. But for an audience watching it live, it becomes magic.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
We've worked a lot with the puppet mongers.
Yes. Yeah.
For years and years, decades. And I'm always astonished by, they do things like found puppetry. Well, they'll take items in a room and turn it into some sort of a puppet.
Yeah.
And the amount of, the suspension of disbelief is remarkable. Like you can put a garbage bag over your arm and treat it as a puppet. It would be more believable sometimes than an actor,
Sometimes, absolutely. When you guys were starting to create your own work, it was out of necessity so that you could hold your relationship together. Aside from, did you guys have any trepidation that it wouldn't work, or were you just like, this has to work if we're gonna do this?
Yeah, no, there was no dark night of the soul. We loved working together. We'd worked together for 3 years at school. We loved working together. We loved being partners, and we kind of fell into it oddly. our first sort of major show was a thing called The Blue Wall, which was about cops. We interviewed a bunch of Metro Toronto policemen, and I was directing it, and one of the actors had a nervous breakdown.
Okay.
And I had to step into his part, and Sue took over, and she has never looked back. She's become one of the best directors in the city.
Yeah.
So it really was by chance that we both I headed into sort of playwriting and libretti, and Sue headed into to direction, and she's damn good. I've been riding her coattails for years.
Well, how did you guys end up teaching? Like now you're, she's director at Georgetown Theatre School.
She's coordinator.
Yeah. And you're teaching theater art or sort of theater history and some other things. So how did you guys find your way to teaching?
Well, I mean, because George Brown is a community college, it's considered a trade school, and trade schools hire working people, and that's how we came into it. The paycheck was nice. So for me, it's been a teaching and a learning experience, because I've gotten to read all those plays, teaching theater history, that I've never had the time to kind of go, oh, I really should read that play, because it wasn't particularly well read. Now, the amount of stuff I know it's mind expanding, and it's also very daunting, because the more I learn, the less I know. I look at my old teaching notes and I go, boy, I really had no idea what I was talking about.
Isn't it fascinating how that's sort of the case? The more you pick up, the more you realize there is to learn.
Oh, it's And the one that I've been laughing at is the Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know whether you've ever heard of that.
I have.
Mount Stupid.
Yes.
You go on any NASA post and watch all the flat earthers sort of weigh in, and that's it. Like if you become a journeyman historian, it's kind of daunting to realize how much you don't know.
Yeah.
You kind of have to. It's always nice to have those theories confirmed. Like I'm just totally obscure, but I'm reading on a thing on Erwin Piscator, who is sort of a contemporary of Bertolt Brecht in Berlin, Weimar, Germany. And I've been teaching about Piscator, but I've never really read a decent biography on him. I'm just reading it now and going, yes, I'm glad I was right about this guy, because I had very, very little information. I was just at a wonderful book launch last night at Passe Muraille. Martin Julian's wonderful actor. He's one of the guys we worked with a number of occasions. He sort of compiled a history of theater Passe Muraille.
Oh, right, I did hear about this. Yeah.
And I snatched up the book last night. They had a wonderful reading. A bunch of the old Passe Muraille people showed up, and to have that history down is really important. Because it's easy to lose institutional memory.
Absolutely, it is.
Specifically with theaters in this town, we tend to think that, nothing happened before us. And a lot happened before us. So.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, because speaking about theater history, I think a lot of people take things like Factory, Tarragon, Passe Muraille for granted. They've always been there.
Yeah.
But they came out of a particular movement and explosion and of creativity in theater.
They were the original independent theaters.
Yeah.
They were indie theaters.
Yeah.
They called themselves independent theaters. But they were the storefronts of their day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's the loss of institutional memory that if we don't remember where they came from, we can't really know where to go.
I always love working with new actors, fresh actors who are doing these wonderful things, and they think that they came up with the idea.
Sure, yeah.
And you go, well, actually, no. I think it was Meyerhold who did that. That's another. Yeah, you get to be very pedantic after a while. You read too much.
Sure, but also, I mean, I remember when I was in first year theater school, I knew everything. Yeah. Again, Kruger Dunning. I knew everything in first year, and I think by the third year, I was like, no, actually, I don't know anything. But I think my first 6 months of school were pretty certain.
There's that old trope, and we had one of our instructors say, "You'll be 10 years out, and you're still a student." And we went, "Yeah,
no,
it's very true. If you make it 10 years, you're a veteran,
Yeah.
But also the learning experience of just doing shows and doing work is way more important than what you learn in the 3 years.
I can remember at one point in theater school, Peter Wilde saying, listen, at some point, 10 years from now, something that you don't understand now is just going to drop, and you're going to be, oh, that's what they're talking about. And I thought, listen, old man, why can't you just come out and tell me this? Don't play this bullshit. And then 10 years after, I was like,
Yeah.
oh!
Yes.
But it would never have meant anything to me if it'd just been like, here's the thing you need to know.
Yeah. It's funny the instructors you remember. We had an instructor named Michael Mawson at the school, and I always thought he hated me. And anything I did, he would always like just really shake his head.
Yeah.
But it's odd that it's like I didn't realize it until about 5 years out that Peter had actually been pulling for me, or not Peter. Michael had actually been pulling for me at the school, and he'd said things that come back to me now. Where other instructors that I actually loved more, I don't quite recall what they were talking about, but his stuff I still hear in the back of my head.
Yeah.
He's just somebody who's in your court, but you never knew it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And it comes with, it's immaturity, and we see it in our students too. They look like they're adults, but they're not. They're still growing. They're still very affected by stuff that goes on. And of course too, it's a totally new ball game in terms of education.
Do you find that, because I know people come to George Brown at different points in their lives. Some people come straight out of high school, and some people come with a few years under their belt. Maybe they are 25, 26, maybe even 30. I remember when I started, there was a girl who was 30 and we thought she was so old. But Peter would also always say things like, I wish you were 30. I could teach you so much if you were 30. And you're always like, no, teach me now. Do you see much of a difference between students who are right out of high school or students who've had a few years under their belt?
Yeah, the biggest difference was we sort of lived through the elimination of grade 13.
Yeah.
And the new cohort was far more immature.
Right. Because some of them came out of school when they were 17, 18. Yeah.
Yeah. And you'll get a student who's 17, who's remarkably mature and wonderful, and then you'll get somebody. You could have a 30-year-old in your class who's a complete bastard, plays and totally immature.
Yeah,
that doesn't matter, but you do have to be aware of that, because even though they look like adults, you know that you have to be careful. And just steer them in the right direction, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
This has been a discussion about George Brown.
Well, I mean, this sort of turned into that, but in terms of Fringe, I mean, you and Sue have a long history of producing at the Fringe.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Did we talk about the first show at the Fringe? Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, the first show we did was in 1989 in Toronto Fringe. Gregory Nixon was running it, and there was a parade. That was the big thing I remember. Nobody thinks of Toronto as being cool, so, you don't do your parades, your Fringe parades. But Gregory organized a parade down Bloor Street.
Oh, really?
And it was us and about 20 other people. I think Sky Gilbert was there, Hume Baugh, I think Eddie Roy. And we had a show called High Sticking, which was 3 period plays. That was sort of in our sports craze time. And that was one of the pieces was the Gretzky piece, and we'd written some companion pieces that went on to do very well. There was a one-woman show called Eleanor that we did about a field hockey girl that ended up being done by Tina Fey, of all people.
Oh, shit.
In Chicago, yeah. Wow. That one still gets done. It went into those audition books.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And it's kind of weird watching it 20 years, 30 years
Do people
later.
ever show up at their audition doing one of those?
Just
pieces?
happened.
Oh, yeah, really?
Yeah. It's a bit, you look at that little thing, your name, and then you see 1960 and then a dash and then a blank. And then you go, I feel a little, I feel death running at pace, but.
It's interesting, the parade. I didn't know that Toronto had a parade, because as far as I know, the only Fringe that still does a parade is Edmonton.
Yeah. It was a blast, dude. Nobody knew what the hell was going on. It was a very small Fringe. I mean, we did our show at the Palmerston Library. The poor Alex, bless its heart, missed the poor Alex.
Oh, fuck, the poor Alex, yeah.
What a fulcrum that was.
Yeah.
I think it's a poutineerie now or something, but.
Yeah. No, I remember that space.
It was like that. That's where Human Remains premiered in.
That's true.
In Ontario, in Toronto.
Yeah.
And Jim left the phone off the hook of the box office, and it helps having Brent Carver in the cast in a 50-seat house, right?
Yeah.
And it was just insane. Like, you could not get a ticket. That's something that the Fringe kind of delivers too.
Oh, sure.
It's, you have people like screaming at the poor volunteers because they can't get in because it's sold out.
Yeah.
And that kind of, what would you call it?
passion,
melting pot or passion.
Yeah.
You don't quite get elsewhere.
No, you don't. You don't see lineups for theater like that outside of Fringe. I remember lining up for Kim's Convenience at the first Fringe run,
Right.
An hour and a half before tickets even went on sale, just to make sure that we got tickets for it. You know, so it's rare to see that kind of excitement for a show.
You're right, and it's a festival setting.
Yeah.
I mean, you get that with the festivals and hot dogs and stuff, and it's really electric. And people have, like, the Drowsy Chaperone. It actually didn't start at Fringe; it started in the back of the Rivoli. I think.
No, because it was like somebody's engagement
wedding
party.
That's right. Yeah. But to see that, like, I actually preferred that version the best of all the versions. You know, the Fringe version.
Yeah.
I'm biased, but I mean, we've been doing it for a long time. This is our 10th sort of Pea Green show at the Fringe.
Nice.
And most of them have gone on to something else, something larger.
Yeah.
So the Fringe is working for us, man.
Yeah.
And our company, when we first started out, when the Fringe started out here, it was sort of copied on Edmonton, on Paisley's model.
Yeah.
But it was much smaller. It was providing a function within the community where there was a lot of we were the sort of third wave of companies coming out of the schools.
Yeah.
So we didn't have access to operating funding.
Yes. Yeah.
In fact, I remember one of the guys from the Canada Council coming down to the small theatre caucus and going, "We got nothing for you. Just do it. Go out and be fruitful. But we're not going to give you operating funding because that's done."
Yeah.
Right. So we were like, "Okay, what are we going to do?" Well, there was the Fringe.
Yeah.
And there was that initial snobbery from certain theaters and stuff, but they ended up programming Fringe shows.
Well, sure they did, because I remember Mump and Smoot doing stuff at the Fringe, and then next thing you know, they were at Can Stage, and there's stuff. It couldn't be denied the stuff that was happening at Fringe.
Yeah, because that was the next generation. What should have happened was there should have been a massive influx of cultural dollars.
Yeah.
And we were getting into that sort of neoliberal idea of austerity that still hangs like an albatross around our necks and is part of Toronto and a part of the whole economic model we're in now. And that was a great opportunity that was lost to make Toronto a real theatrical cultural hub and to basically expand the economy. There's you don't hear. I've been through this because I've been a counselor at Equity and I've been on the Toronto Theatre Caucus, Theatre Alliance. So I'm not a huge fan of those arts administrators who go, "Well, look at the spin-off, the artistic spin-offs and stuff," as they're trying to convince some mogul to give them money, begging on their knees. Look, there's spin-off. I don't. I'm more of an art for art's sake guy.
Sure.
And if people can't recognize the value of art as a cultural activity, something to grow our culture, to grow our way of life, and to make life better, to not make us slaves to that sort of ideology.
I feel like that one of the problems is that when the average person who's not a regular theater goer thinks about theater, they think of the big musicals at the Mirvish theaters or like massive shows like that, and they think, "Oh, I can't afford that," or "That's like for people who have a lot of money," and they don't see the vibrant underground indie stuff that's happening. And a lot of them don't even think of the Factory, Tarragon, or Pass Where I models. So there's like a big jump. They think that it's something that they can't access.
Yeah, it's dissemination. Also too, there's revolutions going on across, like the whole idea of going to see something in some dusty little place somewhere, which was, a factory lab theater was that. You'd go to the candle factory and get covered in soot and see something really crazy.
Yeah.
But there were people who would make that journey.
Sure.
Now it's a totally different game. You don't have the sort of coverage, media coverage, because journalism is, pretty well dead. Everything's any theater stuff is behind a paywall now.
Either paywall or it's all online. There's no you can't access it in print or anything.
Yeah. There's another thing about it. It's more of a societal issue, I think, and it's something that I sort of discovered when I do my classes and stuff, looking back at history. It's our shrinking middle class. If you have an educated middle class, and this is like David Mamet says this, if you have an educated middle class, they want to go see theater, and they'll take a chance, they'll take a risk. But when you have no middle class, theater is only for the intensely poor or the intensely rich, and that's it. And that's our society right now. Yeah. There's this huge gap as those middle class jobs disappear. Without money in the pocket, the middle class have no no desire. They're too busy beating the wolves from the door to go see theater.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds depressing, but
yes. We'll try to keep this on the up. Actually, one last thing before we finish off, I wanted to talk about creating a style, because you created a style, or you developed a style for spoken decor, and you based that on a music hall songs and things like that. What for you went into creating a specific style for these shows?
Well, we've always had a storytelling style very early on in our company's history. It wasn't necessarily period stuff. Like, for example, our cop show. It's a very distinctive storytelling style, right? It's not the well-made play. It's a series of monologues. In this case, there's more of a narrative thread, but there's always this physicality. We have to, because we don't have a set. And it was one of those things where, we thought we were doing something really unique with these shows. And then I read all about Grotowski and the Poor Theater. And it was like, well, somebody always has done it before.
Sure, yeah.
But it really very much is that. It's very much Poor Theater. And the actors have to be good enough and strong enough and energetic enough in order to pull it off. The spoken decor really is almost Shakespearean in that, think when we speak of horses that you see them. That is spoken decor. Right? It's a very British model. And the audience is part of it. And that's part of the music hall. The music is really wonderful. We had Riggs and Toot, who's a former teacher at George Brown. He did an adaptation of the Eton boating song for our original show, Three Men in a Boat. And now he's done a bicycle craze song from 1900 called Velocipede Jiminy.
Okay.
It's close harmony with the three men, and they're really good singers. So there is a musical element to this. Somebody said, I didn't know you'd written a musical. And I said, I guess I did. And it's like, no, not really. But because it's that sort of stand and deliver kind of stuff, the story, the music fits in really well. Yeah. So,
were you consciously trying to develop a different style? Or was that something that just sort of like, you were like, this is the only way that this can work?
Right. We're if you could call our style, it would be neo-expressionism. It's, we're anti-realists. Okay. We don't do Uncle Vanya. Yeah. Love Uncle Vanya, but we do very presentational style theater. And that's what feeds into it, that kind of storytelling style. There used to be this, you're too young, but there used to be this show called Storytime Theater on PBS. And it was a bunch of hippies who had a caravan, and they filmed it.
No, actually, I do remember that show.
Yeah, a lot of amazing stuff came out. A lot of amazing people came out of that. And that was the style that we liked. That's why we hooked up with the Canadian Dell'Arte guys to do Venetian Elopement. Another Fringe show that was really good. And we did it in the classic style. But it is that literally we're working out of the back of a caravan sort of thing. And we've always loved doing that.
I was curious about the creation of the style, because when I worked with Keystone Theatre, our first question was, so we want to do this silent film thing, but how do you transfer film to theater? So we spent a good year trying to determine that. And
I just realized where I recognized it. I saw that show.
So we that's.
The Klondike show, right? You did
that was our third show, actually, the Klondike show. And so it was like, how do you do this? And so you want to tell a story in a specific way. And were you trying to do like the spoken decor? Did that come out of you knew you needed to tour it, or was it just what was right for this show?
Well, when you hang around long enough, you start to think about practicality.
Yes.
The limitations aren't a bad thing in art, we were wanting to make a very entertaining piece that wouldn't, ruffle too many feathers. But the style was pretty ferocious. So we kind of knew how to do it. And some actors, we call it, like our company's called Pea Green. Some actors, we work with them and they're either Pea Green or they're not. They're Pea Green, we can work with them again because they get it. They get the language.
Sure.
And I mean, every company does that.
Yeah.
Every group of artists has their own language. The Canadian Dell'Arte boys had it too, right? They just know how to work. They've worked together in an ensemble so tight that some of them don't even have to speak. There was Rena Polly and Kathy. She's going to kill me for forgetting her name. Kathy Hayes. They had a company that they did two-handed shows, and they had this weird sort of signaling thing that they used to do because they did a lot of tight choreo and tight sort of storytelling style, and they would sniff at each other to do like changes. And
okay.
It was all like very almost musical in its weird approach. We love that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
it has nothing to do with naturalism or that kind of realistic single arc kind of story stuff. It really has to do with presentational, very expressionist style.
Yeah.
And that's what you guys do. Like,
absolutely. That's what we did. Yeah.
And it's fun,
Oh my God, it's so fun. Like, it's so fun. Yeah. It's so fun to subvert an audience's expectation. Yeah. Like when an audience doesn't know what they're going to get. If I walk into a theater and I don't see, I just see a stool, I'm like, oh, what's this? If I don't see a set, even though it's Fringe, it's like I expect to see something. And so
my partner Sue, she always says the audience wants to know in the first minute that they're in good hands. So you make sure to give them something really interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
And once she sees that, she because we've seen a lot of theater over the years, some really remarkable theater, some really terrible theater. We're on the Dora jury a few times, and it's like,
I mean, there's it can't all be good. Like you take risks, and sometimes it pays off, and sometimes it doesn't.
And that is like, I'm at an age where I actually really like watching the risk taking, even if they fall on their ass. I really would way rather see that than a company that's phoning it in. Yeah. On a show that is safe, and I far prefer that. It's just it's lifeblood, and then Fringe is really good for that too.
Absolutely, because you could see like people, like especially people who are like it's their first thing. It's so raw and it's so new, and
the Fringe does have that popular appeal.
Yeah,
that the thing that's missing from the smaller like standalone shows, and God bless them, like so many different small companies, they managed to get a little, like Tannehill's company, so they managed to get a little, little tiny spaces, but doing really great. But it must be tough to do standalone stuff. We used to do that, and it's the difference between a $60,000 budget and a $6,000 budget.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
Like, the economics of it just don't make any sense to do
really
that
hard
anymore.
To do that
2 weeks in the backspace of the Tarragon, and nobody comes to see, no critic will come to see it.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense anymore.
No.
The festival is the way to go. It's always been that. Like, it's been that way since.
It's certainly the way to go to get something noticed and to start something, for sure. Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you so much. It's been awesome.
Hey, it's great.
This has been a Homebody Productions production.